Get out of here, you worthless idiot.
With that, my classmate Chris poured a glass of wine on my clothes. The room fell silent as Chris shouted loudly. Ashley, my beautiful secretary, quickly tried to wipe my jacket, but the stain had already set in. The pleasant atmosphere changed abruptly, and the room started buzzing. Ashley, angrier than I was, glared at Chris and asked me,
David, should we fire him?
What?
Chris looked surprised at Ashley's sudden words. We don't need to fire him, but we will stop doing business with his company. As I said this, Kevin, the president, hurriedly apologized. Seeing this, Chris realized my position. My name is David, and I live with my mom, who will turn 70 this year. Now, I can provide her with a more comfortable life, but we used to live in poverty. After my dad passed away, our life became difficult. My mom worked both day and night to support the household. Because of that, I often stayed home alone, but sometimes my uncle Michael, my mom's brother, would come to visit. Michael was very kind and often brought me treats. Thanks to him, I didn't feel lonely. Over time, I began to see Michael as a father figure. I'm naturally shy and had trouble making my friends at school. As a result, I spent a lot of time alone. I always loved reading, so I spent time at the library. Maybe because of that, I was always at the top of my class. However, making friends was still difficult for me. Honestly, it was partly because of my personality, but also because of the bullying from my classmate, Chris. Back then, my classmate Chris always picked on me, seemingly because he disliked me. He was very active and athletic, often seen as a leader, and many people were afraid of him. I lived in fear of him too. Chris had a very loud voice and spoke harshly. I was very sensitive to criticism, and just being spoken to by him made me tremble. Even when I did nothing wrong, I was scared to go to school. But thinking of my mom working so hard, I couldn't skip school. I didn't want to worry my mom.
It's your fault the ball went so far. Go get it.
Sorry, I got it.
Physical education was very tough for me because I wasn't athletic. But despite that, Chris always bullied me. I especially struggled with team sports. Knowing this, Chris would deliberately throw the ball at me. And when I couldn't catch it, he would blame me. Every time we had physical education, Chris harassed me.
David, it's your fault the class is being held up.
Sorry, I just can't catch it.
Because of this, my classmates always whispered about me. No one defended me. They were all too scared to stand up to Chris. Chris's behavior towards me escalated even further after that. I often got criticized for unreasonable things. But none of my classmates wanted to be targeted by Chris, so they all pretended not to see it. I had to endure Chris's behavior alone. Chris, being selfish and egocentric, became even more influential in high school. We were in the same class in high school, and he gathered a group of friends and continued to bully me. Being poor, I couldn't afford new clothes, so I wore hand-me-down uniforms, and he mocked me for that.
You're wearing a dirty uniform. Don't come near me. I don't want to catch your poverty.
That's not true. It's just a bit worn out because it's a hand-me-down.
Shut up. Don't talk back to me.
I was in the same class with him all through high school and endured his bullying and complaints. But since I was poor, I had to start working right after graduation. With our financial situation, there was no way I could afford college, and I didn't even consider it. My mom apologized to me every day, but I was determined to bring money into the household by getting a job. However, it was difficult to find a place that would hire a high school graduate. So, I asked my Uncle Michael for help, and he hired me. Michael accepted me, even though I only had a high school diploma. I was the only one in my class not going to college. So, the news quickly spread throughout the class. When Chris heard that I wasn't going to college, he started making snide comments again.
Is your family so poor that you can't even go to college?
It's because of my family circumstances. I can't help it.
He looked down on me for not going to college, trying to assert his superiority.
I'm going to a prestigious college that's well known around here. Unlike you, I'm going to be an elite, but I guess that's impossible for someone poor like you.
At that time, Chris's family was very wealthy. His dad made a fortune in stocks, and they lived in a big house. Because of this, Chris looked down on me until our high school graduation. However, I was relieved thinking I would never see him again. After graduating high school, I was fortunate to work for Michael. Although the sales weren't great, he still paid me a decent salary. Thanks to that, my mom and I could live a little more comfortably. I was grateful to Michael and dedicated myself to my work every day. And since I couldn't go to college, I studied on my own. Michael also taught me about business management. 20 years have passed since then, and today I was invited to a social gathering, so I decided to attend. Officially, it's a community networking event, but it's really a business meet and greet. While dealing with the vendors handing out business cards, I enjoyed the food and drinks. I was there representing Michael's company, but since it was my first time attending, I didn't know anyone. I attended with Ashley, the company's secretary, who was talking to vendors at a different table. Having worked as the secretary at the company for many years, Ashley knew more people than I did. Then, despite arriving late, a man entered speaking loudly. I couldn't believe my ears at first, but the voice was familiar. It was Chris, who had made my high school years miserable. It was the first time I'd seen him since graduation, and all those memories of bullying came flooding back. My body started trembling, and I wanted to run away, but it was too late. Chris saw me and came over.
What is a loser like you doing here?
I was invited by an acquaintance. Chris looked me over the way he used to, with a mocking expression. He hadn't changed at all and started making snide comments. He glanced at his suit, then at mine, smirking slightly.
Wearing such a cheap suit, how did you even get in here?
Well, I don't usually wear suits much.
That's why I hate poor people. Unlike me, an elite who always wears designer suits.
Dressed in a designer suit and with a fuller figure, Chris looked imposing. But his face hadn't changed since high school, still bearing that same mean look. Seeing Chris unchanged made me tremble all over. I heard that Chris got a job at a major local company. He was handing out business cards, boasting to everyone about being a manager. I was half amused by his unchanging overconfidence. He hasn't changed at all, even as an adult.
Why are you here? I thought only special people could attend this event.
I got an invitation. It's part of my job. Chris seemed to think I didn't belong there and kept pestering me. He seemed genuinely annoyed that I was at the event. Since only executives were supposed to attend this gathering, he was suspicious of my presence.
Why are you here? Only executives can attend.
I'm representing Michael. It's my first time attending this year. When I explained, Chris snickered dismissively. He finished his glass of wine and continued speaking.
You're a small company anyway, right? This event sure has changed, inviting small ones.
I don't think it's that small of a company.
My company is a major firm, so it's nothing like yours.
Chris seemed a bit irritated, unable to accept my presence there. At this elite gathering, he wanted to emphasize our difference in status. He continued to drink and started ranting to the people around him. As he got drunk, his already loud voice became even louder, and he grew more excited. While I was enjoying the food, he whispered complaints.
I hate poor people. Coming to a place like this and just eating. You usually don't get to eat anything this fancy, do you?
Chris laughed loudly and continued to drink heavily, looking down on me. I tried to stay calm, no matter what he said. There was no point in arguing here. I thought that if I argued back, he would just retaliate again. Chris, who was always big and selfish, had been like this since we were kids. Seeing him unchanged as an adult made me feel a bit sorry for him. Presentations continued on stage, and I enjoyed the food and drink. The food was luxurious, and I wished my mom could taste it. Even though our life had improved, she was never one for indulgence. But she loved good food, so I knew she'd be thrilled by these dishes. There are supposed to be souvenirs later. I'll bring some home to make her happy. While I was thinking this, Chris, now drunk, reappeared and spat more venom at me. Fueled by alcohol, he seemed to let out everything he'd been holding back.
Get out of here, you worthless idiot.
As he said this, he poured his wine all over me. The room erupted in shock, and Ashley, my secretary, rushed over.
David, are you okay?
She quickly called for staff and asked for a towel while using her handkerchief to wipe my jacket. But the stain was too large for a handkerchief to clean. Even Ashley's beautiful handkerchief got stained with wine.
We need to get this cleaned immediately. Oh no, this stain might not come out.
The stain's not coming out. It's okay, Ashley. Thank you. She took off my jacket and tried desperately to remove the stain, but it wouldn't budge. The staff said they would arrange for cleaning and took my jacket away. I thought I couldn't wear this jacket anymore, so I gave up. Then Ashley shouted loudly at Chris.
You're the one who poured wine on our president, right? Chris, wasn't it? You're the manager at Smith Corporation, correct?
Yes, but what about it? Did you just call David the president? What do you mean by that?
Chris looked puzzled, not understanding Ashley's question. He couldn't have imagined that I had become the president. Ashley was angrier than I was at Chris for not even apologizing for pouring the wine on me.
David, should we fire him?
What?
Chris still didn't understand what was happening when Ashley said that. He probably didn't realize the gravity of his situation yet. He glared at Ashley and still didn't apologize. Then Kevin, Chris's company president, appeared. He must have heard from his employees about Chris pouring wine on me and rushed over. He hadn't seen what happened and came in a hurry to apologize to me.
David, I am deeply sorry for Chris's behavior.
Seeing Kevin apologize to me, Chris looked confused. He was baffled that I knew Kevin and that Kevin was apologizing to me. It's been a while, Kevin.
I'm sorry for not keeping in touch.
Michael took care of Kevin for a long time. Kevin is now the president of a publicly traded company, but his company was in the red back in the day. Despite his own company being in jeopardy, Michael was concerned about Kevin and took care of him. To Kevin, Michael was a special mentor. Michael nurtured the failing company into a top-tier business. I knew how hard Michael had worked. In my youth, I watched his relentless effort. However, when his company finally became renowned, Michael fell ill. As a result, Michael entrusted the company to me, making me the president. However, being a high school graduate and a president subjected me to harsh criticism from the public. Worried about this, Michael kept his name as the official president. That's why only the top executives of the companies directly involved knew that I was the actual president. Afterward, Michael passed away due to his illness, but this secret was kept.
I've heard about how much you studied and worked hard.
I've heard about your struggles from Michael as well. Listening to our conversation, Chris began to understand the situation and started sweating. Seeing Kevin, the president of his own company, apologizing to me, Chris finally realized his position. His attitude shifted, and he began asking Kevin about the situation.
Well, so, Kevin, do you know David?
He's not just an acquaintance. He's the nephew of my benefactor. Chris, you're being incredibly disrespectful.
Kevin grabbed Chris by the collar, looking ready to hit him. I hurried over to Kevin and pulled them apart. No, Kevin, this won't solve anything.
David, don't stop me. Chris has done something unforgivable.
I tried to calm the agitated Kevin, speaking to him gently. I didn't want Kevin to get hurt because of someone like Chris. Chris, scolded by Kevin, finally seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. Then, Ashley, who had been listening to our conversation, asked me again about Chris's punishment.
David, what do you want to do about his punishment?
We don't need to fire him, but we will stop doing business with his company. Hearing this, Kevin turned pale and started pleading with me.
Please don't do that.
Stop apologizing, Kevin. Chris, not knowing what to do, started panicking as Kevin continued to apologize. He probably didn't know about the connection between our companies. We had kept my presidency a secret to maintain this confidentiality. Kevin, please stop apologizing.
But our company will go under.
I slowly took Kevin's hand. From the beginning, I had no intention of causing trouble for Kevin. I was testing to see if Chris would genuinely change his attitude. Chris, you've made Kevin, your company's president, go through all this. What are you planning to do now?
I didn't realize that you, my childhood friend, had become so important.
Chris seemed to have adjusted his attitude slightly, but he still didn't look like he wanted to apologize to me. From his expression, it was clear he didn't realize the precariousness of his situation. Chris still didn't fully grasp the gravity of his actions and the damage he had caused. Originally, Michael gave some of his company's work to Kevin's company to help them turn a profit. That's why Kevin's company is a subcontractor for mine, receiving work from us. If I stopped the business relationship here, Kevin's company would fall back into deficit operation. Kevin hurriedly explained the company's structure to Chris, who was still confused. Chris heard that and clung to me.
Please, I was wrong. Can we continue doing business?
I patted Chris on the shoulder and whispered coldly, "If you can help Kevin, I won't say anything."
Are you telling me to quit the company?
Simply firing Chris wouldn't solve the problem. If I fired him here, given his personality, he would surely spread the story elsewhere. Chris was always self-centered and quick to blame others. I wanted to avoid any further trouble Chris might cause for Kevin. Not quitting, but I want you to complete a task I'm going to give you.
A task from you?
I thought that simply making Chris resign wouldn't solve anything. He needed to reflect on what he had done. To do that, he needed to understand how unreasonable his behavior had been, so I proposed the task. Chris looked anxious, but he seemed to decide that he had no choice but to accept what I said. He apologized to me and asked for another chance. It's simple. You'll do it for 3 months starting tomorrow. I laid out the task for Chris.
Oh, you mean me? Doing something like that. It's too embarrassing.
Whether you do it or not is up to you. But if you don't, you're fired. The task I set was to stand at the busy intersection in front of his company every morning and greet people. The area in front of Chris's company was busy with traffic, but was also used by elderly people and children on their way to school. I told him to help direct traffic and assist people crossing the street. I was made to do this when I first joined Michael's company. There was a purpose behind it.
First, it teaches you to have compassion for others. Second, it helps you get rid of your insignificant pride. Without these, you can't succeed in society.
That's what Michael always told me. By repeatedly doing something you find embarrassing, your own value naturally increases. And it nurtures a spirit of being recognized by others. The results will be visible. If you slack off, you'll face consequences. But do you accept the challenge?
All right, 3 months it is.
Chris, though still somewhat skeptical, agreed to start the task the next day. Fortunately, that intersection is on Ashley's commute route, so she can check on Chris's progress every day. I entrusted this task to Ashley because she is calm and capable of assessing people objectively. For someone who has never done it, greeting strangers can be incredibly tough. Sometimes you get ignored, and sometimes people look at you suspiciously. It's challenging, but if he succeeds, he'll naturally make new acquaintances and become better at greeting people. Given Chris's long-standing arrogant attitude and habit of looking down on others, I felt this was the only way to help him improve. True to his word, Chris arrived early and stood at the intersection the next morning. Though he had been dismissive and bullying towards people, at first, he couldn't even bring himself to speak. He couldn't greet anyone and just stood there. Whether it was embarrassment or pride, this continued for nearly a week. Eventually, he got used to it and started greeting people. His greetings were still gruff, but he even began exchanging greetings with local children. Seeing this, Ashley thought Chris might really be able to change his attitude. Since Ashley, who had been very strict with Chris, said this, I felt pleased and confident that my suggestion was the right one. However, just as the 3 months were about to end, Chris got into an argument. An elderly man with a bad leg was slowly crossing the street, and Chris was irritated and complained to him. The man then asked Chris which company he was from.
I'm from Smith Corporation. Is there a problem? It's none of your business.
Chris assumed the old man was weak and treated him rudely. But the elderly man turned out to be the chairman of a well-known local company. Realizing this, Chris went to apologize, but the old man didn't forgive him. The chairman showed up at Chris's company and spoke to Kevin. Despite Kevin's apologies, the situation was resolved by firing Chris due to their business connections. The old man was very angry at Chris for judging people by their appearance and acting arrogantly. Such behavior is never acceptable. As a result, Chris caused trouble for his company. No matter what you give to an unreasonable person, their core character never changes. But when they experience the consequences firsthand, they might realize their wrongdoing. This was my goal from the start. Even after learning that Kevin and I were longtime acquaintances, Chris didn't change his behavior. To dismiss Chris without troubling Kevin, who was important to me, external criticism was necessary. That's why I anticipated someone else would point out Chris's mistakes. My prediction was accurate, and Chris couldn't change his fundamental nature. As expected, Chris ended up losing his job, but at least, Kevin, you won't be blamed.
Thank you so much. If I had fired Chris back then, who knows what people would be saying about me now?
As Kevin and I shook hands, we felt we had learned the importance of human relationships. We vowed to continue valuing people in the future. After that, I heard that Chris left town and started looking for work in other areas. However, due to his constant arrogance and foul mouth, he seemed to go from job to job. He would start a new job, initially humble, but as he got comfortable, his arrogance returned, making it increasingly difficult for him to stay at any company. Moreover, now that he's over 50, it seems he couldn't secure a decent job. Unable to learn from his mistakes, Chris eventually lost his job and began to struggle financially. Chris used to dress in fancy suits with flashy accessories. After leaving his stable job, he couldn't even hold a temporary job for long and struggled to make ends meet. That's the kind of life he ended up leading. The man who once looked down on others without financial worries ended up becoming poor. No matter how much he tried, Chris couldn't change his fundamental character. He was married, but his wife eventually got fed up and left him, leading to a divorce. His luxury car was also put up for sale. Having lost everything and being left alone, no one knew what Chris was doing now. Gradually, people stopped talking about Chris. Afterward, I carried on Michael's legacy and worked with Kevin's company on new product development. We focused on improving the quality of parts that could be stabilized with even the smallest screws, and successfully developed a new product. This achievement was recognized, leading to an increase in clients and a rise in stock prices. Our company was featured in magazines as a noteworthy business, and we were fortunate to have great co-workers. Both my company and Kevin's company are now thriving as publicly traded companies. As a side note, I ended up marrying Ashley. Actually, she confessed to me after all of this. Honestly, I was surprised, but Ashley had apparently been watching over me for a long time. I also loved Ashley, who had been supporting me ever since I became the president. But I never thought she would have feelings for someone like me, so I kept my feelings hidden. Finding out that we both felt the same way made me incredibly happy. Since we were getting married later in life, we didn't have a wedding ceremony. Ashley, who is older than me, said, "I don't want to wear a dress at my age," so I gave her a special diamond ring instead. Seeing it, Ashley cried with joy and constantly admired the sparkling diamond. Lately, my mom gets along better with Ashley than with me, and I sometimes get a bit jealous. I've always been a bit of a mama's boy, so it felt like I had my first rival. Because Ashley and my mom are like real family who can tell each other what they want. I want to keep seeing their smiles forever. Being able to succeed as a president despite having been reserved since childhood. And the one who gave me the courage to vow to protect both Ashley and my mom was, after all, Michael with his teachings. Understanding people's hearts and becoming stronger myself has led to my current life. I vowed to always consider others' feelings and live for Ashley and my mom. Being a strong man means being someone who loves and is loved. I'm going to focus on improving